afternoon, you're watching the English newscast on Future Television. I'm Lina Tamim, and these are today's top stories. The Lebanese army raids a jihadist post on the outskirts of Ras Balbek, attacking gunmen and causing casualties among their ranks. 3 more Lebanese truck drivers cross into Lebanon after being stranded on the Syrian-Jordanian border following a rebel seizure of the Syrian side last week. And members of the UN Security Council expressed concern regarding what they call the grave situation in Yarmouk after the besieged area was infiltrated by the Islamic State last week. The Lebanese army has raided a jihadist post on the outskirts of the northeastern town of Ras Balbek, attacking gunmen and causing casualties among their ranks. The military and the National News Agency says the airborne regiment controlled the strategic post at Al Mukhayrmeh Hill at dawn, leaving 3 of them dead and 4 injured. The operation on the hill that lies 1,564 meters above the sea level came after the military received information that terrorist groups were making combat and logistics preparations. The army units reportedly returned to their position after the operation, and there were no casualties among their ranks. The army says the attack was in the context of preventive military operations to eradicate militant groups and prevent them from infiltrating Lebanon to target army outposts and civilians. The military recently stepped up its security measures along the northeastern border with Syria to stop the infiltration of terrorists entrenched on the porous border. 3 more Lebanese truck drivers have crossed into Lebanon after they were stranded on the Syrian-Jordanian border following a rebel seizure of the Syrian side last week. The drivers, who hail from the northern Akkad district, were identified by the National News Agency as Ali Shhadi, Yusuf al-Muhammad and Abdul Halim Mahmoud Abdullah. The NNA said the fate of the 4th driver remains unknown. His family urged the Lebanese government to make the necessary contacts to bring him back home. At least 30 drivers were stranded on the Syrian-Jordanian border's free zone area last Wednesday after they entered the crossing as a group of rebels backed by Nusra Front seized control of its following clashes with government forces. Around 6 of the drivers returned to Lebanon on Monday, a day after 8 of them came back home. The brother of captive serviceman Brahim Ghait Nizam has demanded the state to clarify media reports saying that the Islamic State of Iraq and the Levant transferred the soldiers and policemen in its captivity to Syria's Raqqa. Ghait called on the state to task negotiators who are following up the case with bringing a new video for the servicemen within a week. He also warned that the families will escalate their endeavors if they didn't receive any convincing answer. A Binat newspaper reported earlier today that soldiers were transferred to Raqqa while the servicemen in the captivity of a Nusra Front remain on the outskirts of the northeastern border town of Arsal. A 7-year-old boy was killed by the family's dog in the eastern city of Zahle. The National News Agency says the pit bull jumped on Michel Dani Kasuha and grabbed him by the head, killing him instantly. The tragic incident reportedly took place as Michel's father was cleaning one of the kennels at his farm in Zahle, where he breeds and trains dogs. Reports say the father had just unlocked the kennel where the canine was being kept when it suddenly attacked the boy. There is no clear reason for the dog's behavior. And joining me on the line is Animals Lebanon co-founder and vice president, Mrs. Maggie Shahrawi. Maggie, can you hear me?
Yes, Linda, I can hear you. Thank you very much for shedding light on this incident.
Not a problem.
As me and my team, we believe this is a very tragic incident, and we are very sorry for the family of the boy.
Of course. Do you think the pit bulls should be banned in Lebanon as a breed?
Well, okay, this is a very broad subject, and it's been addressed in many countries, the States and Europe. There are some states that ban this breed and some states that doesn't ban it. For us, as our opinion is that any dog can be turned into an aggressive dog. Pit bulls are not necessarily aggressive animals. It really boils down to the fact of responsible ownership and how you treat them and how you socialize them. Dogs are, as you know, products of their environment as well as their genetic. They've been bred for many different jobs over centuries, and pit bulls being as strong and athletic dogs, sadly they're misunderstood, and their strength is abused by some people to be trained for dog fighting. And I don't know how much you know about that, but the process is very cruel. These animals are isolated, they're starved, they're chained, they're
they often use them for dog fights as well.
Yes.
Are they breeds that are they family dogs? Do you advise people who have a family with children to own a pit bull?
Well, yes, and first they need to do their research. Whether it's a pit bull or any other dog, a family should do their research and actually assess the dog temper and character before taking them into their house. It's not a toy. It's a lifetime commitment, and we really encourage adoption because NGOs actually assess the dogs before they go into homes, and they give them based on what the family requires. But I would like to go back to dog fighting a little bit to show why these dogs become as aggressive. I mean, some of them are on drugs. They give them steroids to get their muscles bigger, or narcotics to increase their aggression, their reactivity. They mask their pain. And a lot of time they use other live dogs to use them as bait to make them as aggressive. So in a nutshell, these animals are turned, these sweet animals, I think pit bulls are sweet personally, are turned into monsters by human behavior. I'm not saying this is a specific case of what happened sadly with the little boy, but in general, this is what's happening with pit bulls and why we're having a lot of dog bites from pit bulls.
Maggie, I'd like to focus back on the incident here. Could you explain the dog's behavior? Why do you think this happened?
I really don't know what the training school was doing with the dog, but there could be a lot of maybe the kid doesn't know how to react around dogs, or the dog was trained for fights. I mean, I can't really say. I only heard what you heard over the news. But this is certainly something to look into, especially that Animals Lebanon now is working on a draft legislation, as you know, which covers all animal establishments and regulates them. And definitely dog fighting or any animal fighting is banned because there's no purpose for it and it's not needed. This is very cruel and unethical, act by people.
All right. That was Animals Lebanon co-founder and vice president, Mrs. Maggie Shahrawi. Thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you, Linda, and FutureTV.
Members of the UN Security Council have expressed concern regarding the grave situation in Yarmouk, in the south of the Syrian capital, after the besieged area was infiltrated by the Islamic State of Iraq and the Levant Group last week. Dina Kawa, Jordanian ambassador to the UN and currently the president of the Security Council, says members called for the protection of civilians in the camp for ensuring humanitarian access to the area, including by providing life-saving assistance and ensure safe passage and evacuation of civilians. Yarmouk, set up as a camp for Palestinian refugees decades ago and now a residential area housing Palestinians and Syrians, has been besieged by government forces for nearly 2 years. It has been the scene of fierce clashes between groups taking rival sides in the Syrian conflict. Shortages of food, water and medical supplies have caused serious suffering in the area, where an estimated 18,000 civilians remain. U.S. President Barack Obama says sanctions against Iran could be reimposed if Tehran violates the nuclear deal. That's coming up next. Stay with us. UNICEF says more than 100,000 people have fled their homes after Saudi-led coalition airstrikes began in Yemen. A spokesman from the UN agency says most of those who have been displaced are women and children. In a statement published today, UNICEF, the UN agency that provides humanitarian assistance to children and mothers, says 74 children caught up in fighting had been killed and another 44 maimed since March the 26th. The agency's Yemen representative, Julien Arnay, says children were paying an intolerable price and said more needed to be done to protect them. Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan is visiting Iran despite tensions with Tehran over the crisis in Yemen, where airstrikes by a Saudi-led coalition are targeting Iran-backed Shiite rebels who have taken over much of the country. The Saudi campaign has turned Yemen into a new front in the conflict between the kingdom and Iran. Erdogan, who is accompanied by several government ministers, has backed the Saudi-led campaign against the Houthis in Yemen. Last month, he lashed out at Iran, accusing it of trying to dominate the region and of testing the limits of the region's tolerance. But Iran denies it is helping the Houthis militarily. Tehran also sees NATO missiles in Turkey and Ankara's relations with Israel as potential threats. U.S. President Barack Obama says he is confident sanctions against Iran could be reimposed if Tehran violates an agreement to restrict its nuclear program. Obama told the National Public Radio that U.S. and European negotiators were trying to reach a deal with Iran in which sanctions could be reimposed without a UN Security Council vote, where Tehran ally Russia would have a veto.
Prime Minister Netanyahu, who you mentioned, has added a demand in recent days. He said that as part of this deal, when it's finalized, Iran should recognize the state of Israel. You're smiling as I say that. Diplomats might see that as an obviously inappropriate demand to make in this negotiation, but it sounds reasonable on its face.
It's not that the idea of Iran recognizing Israel, but the notion that we would condition Iran not getting nuclear weapons in a verifiable deal on Iran recognizing Israel is really akin to saying that we won't sign a deal unless the nature of the Iranian regime completely transforms. And that is, I think, a fundamental misjudgment. I want to return to this point. We want Iran not to have nuclear weapons precisely because we can't bank on the nature of the regime changing. That's exactly why we don't want to have nuclear weapons. If suddenly Iran transformed itself into Germany or Sweden or France, there would be a different set of conversations about their nuclear infrastructure. It's completely reasonable, and that's U.S. policy. And I've been very forceful in saying
Pro-Palestinian hackers have targeted Israeli websites following threats from a hacking collective known as Anonymous that it would carry out an electronic holocaust. The hacking campaign called #OpIsrael has been taking place every April 7th in recent years and is a protest against Israeli policies towards the Palestinians. In fact, a video message by Anonymous said its campaign was responding in crimes in the Palestinian territories, including last summer's Gaza war. Israel's Computer Emergency Response Team, a civilian cybersecurity group, says Anonymous attacked a few dozen websites belonging to Israeli musicians and non-profit organizations. No major government websites were affected this year, although previous attempts had targeted the Prime Minister's office and the Israeli Army's website with limited success. This marks the end of our bulletin for today. Now for a reminder of our headlines. The Lebanese army raids a jihadist post on the outskirts of Ras Baalbek, attacking gunmen and causing casualties among their ranks. 3 more Lebanese truck drivers cross into Lebanon after being stranded on the Syrian-Jordanian border following a rebel seizure of the Syrian side last week. And members of the UN Security Council expressed concern regarding what they call the grave situation in Yarmouk after the besieged area was infiltrated by the Islamic State last week. Those are your headlines for today. I'm Linda Tamim, and I wish you all a very nice evening.